Hello friends, today I am going to deliver lecture on the topic of accident law, which is one of a scenario of game theory in which we will try to find out a Nash equilibrium. So in this game we have two players, the player 1 who is the injurer and another one is the victim. So I explain you the whole scenario with the help of an example here. So consider a house is there. Okay, now in front of this house there is a footpath. Okay, maybe this house is in a country where a law say that if is there any footpath in front of a house, then the house owner will have to maintain the footpath. Okay, so I am considering that the owner of this house is P1. Okay, the owner of this house is P1 and P1 will have to maintain this footpath, okay, as per the law. Now we have another player P2, okay, who is walking on this footpath. Okay, now maybe there is a possibility that this footpath is not well maintained. In this case, one of the possibility is that the P2 slipped in this footpath and accident happened. Because of this accident, this player P2 has to go to the hospital for the treatment, and now a question arises: who will bear the treatment? Who will pay the treatment money, the P1 or the P2? Okay, so this is the question here: who will pay for the treatment of this player P2? So here this P1 is what? Injurer, because he is responsible for the loss of P2, and P2 is the victim. Okay, because he is suffering with the loss. Okay, so we have two players, P1 injurer, P2 victim. Okay, and P1 responsibility is to maintain this footpath. Okay, so P1 has to put some care to avoid accident. Also, the P2 is also having some responsibility while walking. If he is irresponsible while walking, then maybe accident can happen. So we need to consider the care of player P2 also. Okay, so so to avoid an accident, we need to, both the players have to be careful. To avoid accident, both the players should be careful. Okay, now in this game we have two players only, the injurer and the victim, and actions are the set of possible care that a player can take. Okay, set of possible care. Now what are the preferences for the players? We will calculate the preferences on the basis of payoff function. Okay, now one thing need to understand here, the loss function. Okay, what is loss here? Sorry, what is loss? Loss that occur due to accident, because of accident. Okay, so we know that accident would occur only when either of the player is not careful, right? If both are careful, then accident will never happen. Okay, and loss will be zero. Okay, so loss is a function which is dependent on the care which the player are taking. So here A is the care which is taken by the injurer and B is the care which is taken by the victim. Okay, A is the care which is taken by the injurer and B is the care taken by the victim. So this loss function actually dependent on only these two things. Okay, now how do we find what amount of loss will be paid by the injurer and what amount of loss will be bear by the victim? So for this we have a fraction function PA comma B. Again, this function is also a function of AB, the care of injurer and the care of victim. Okay, so this function determines how much fraction of the loss will be bear by the injurer. Okay, so this is only for the injurer. Okay, and what will be the fraction function for the victim? 1 minus P A comma B. This is the fraction function for victim. and this is the fraction function for the injurer. Fraction function determines how much percentage of a loss will be paid by the player. Okay, so we have two fraction function, a comma b and 1 minus of p a comma b. Okay, next we calculate the payoff function. We all know that we can denote the payoff function by the help of capital U. Okay, utility function. So here u1 is representing the utility function of player 1, that is injurer. Okay, and we know that that the payoff is actually based on A and B, the care taken by the injurer and the victim. Okay, now I am assuming that the player injurer has invested that much amount, A amount he has invested for the maintenance of the footpath. So we need to consider this amount as negative in this payoff, because this is the amount which the player is spending for the maintenance, right? Now after that investment, if accident happens, means what, this care which the amount which he invested for the maintenance is not sufficient, right? That's why accident happened. Okay, means what, if any accident happens after the care of A amount, means what, the care is not sufficient, right? So if any accident happens, what will be the loss? Loss will be A comma B, right? We know this is the loss function which determines the amount of loss based on the care taken by the injurer and the victim. Now what amount the player P1, that the injurer, will pay? For this we need to multiply this loss function with the fraction function, right? The fraction function calculates the percentage of the loss will be paid by the injurer. Okay, and again this is the amount which the injurer will pay, right? And this will be negative because the amount is paying by the injurer. Okay, so this is our payoff for the injurer. Similarly, we will calculate payoff for the player 2, and we are denoting it by the help of u2. Again, this is the function of A and B, the care taken by the victim and the care taken by the injurer. Okay, so here the B is what? B is the care taken by the victim. Maybe previously he is having some slippery shoes, okay, because of that accident happened. But if the victim invested some money to purchase a new shoes, then he can avoid accident, right? So for avoiding the accident, maybe he can invest B amount for purchasing new shoes. Okay, so this B will be considered as negative. Why? Because he is spending money to get the new shoes. Okay, now if after taking that much care, again if accident happens, then what will be the loss here? L A comma B, this will be the loss. Now what percentage the victim will pay? For this we need to multiply the loss with the fraction function. We know what is the fraction for the victim? 1 minus P of A comma B. This will be the fraction, and this whole term will be negative because the victim has to pay that amount. So this is the loss of, or can say this is the payoff of victim. So far we have calculated the payoff for the injurer and the victim both. Now we try to understand the legal rule. Okay, so here some legal rule are specified for the fraction. So legal rule says the x1 is the standard care for injurer. Means what? X1 is the sufficient care for the injurer. If injurer takes x1 care, then he don't need to pay anything. Means he is not responsible for the loss. He is not responsible for the accident. And also the legal rule has defined some x2 as a standard care for the victim. Means what? If victim is taking x2 amount of care, means what? He is also not responsible for the accident. Okay, so in the legal rules two terms are defined, x1 and the x2. x1 specifies the sufficient care for the injurer, and x2 specifies the standard care for the victim. Now as per the rule, if the care A, we know that A is the care of injurer and B is the care of victim. If the care of the injurer is less than x1, means what? The care of injurer is less than the sufficient care of the injurer. means what? The injurer is responsible for the accident. And here B, the victim care is greater than his sufficient care, means what? Victim is careful, is sufficiently careful, means what? Who is responsible for the accident? Injurer is responsible. So we know this is a function, fraction function, who determines how much fraction of the loss will be paid by the injurer. But here, as per this condition, we have got that the injurer is totally responsible for the loss, therefore the fraction value will be 1. Okay, if fraction value is 1, means what? The 100% of the loss will be paid by the injurer. Now we have second scenario in which the injurer is sufficiently careful. Why? Because the amount of care is greater or equal to x1, that greater than the sufficient care, means he is sufficiently careful, and her victim is careless. Why? Because its care is less than the sufficient care. So we can say that the injurer is not responsible for the accident, so the fraction will be 0, means he don't need to pay anything. The 0% of the loss will be paid by the injurer, means the 0. Okay, he will pay nothing. Okay, now what will be the effect of this legal rule on the payoff? We know the what is the payoff function. We already have calculated the payoff function, u1 a comma b minus a minus fraction of a b multiply with loss of a b, right? So this is the payoff function for player 1. Okay, now if I put these two equations, first equation says that the injurer is careless and victim is careful. Okay, so if injurer is careless, means what? The fraction value will be 1. We will put 1 here and we will get this will be the payoff. Now the second case in which the injurer is careful, sufficient careful, and victim is careless, so means what? This value will become 0, the fraction value will become 0, and this will be the payoff for player 1. Again, now we calculate the payoff for the victim. So we know the function, this is the function 1 minus p a comma b multiply l a comma b. Okay, now if we consider the first situation in which the injurer is injurer is careless, because his care is less than the sufficient care, and victim is sufficiently careful, so injurer is liable for the accident. So in this case we need to put here 1, so we will get 0, means what? The victim will pay nothing, because who is responsible for the loss? Injurer. Now second condition, where injurer is sufficiently careful but victim is careless. So in this case we know this value will become 0 and we will get 1. If we multiply 1 with L, so we will get that the total loss will be bear by the victim. Okay, now we try to find out the Nash equilibrium of this game. Nash equilibrium. To find out the Nash equilibrium, we will try to calculate first the best response function for player 1 and best response function for player 2. Okay, and here I am considering that when I calculating the best response function for player 1, and I am considering that the player 2 is taking the sufficient care. Player 2 is taking sufficient care. Okay, what is the sufficient care? So here I am taking B star. B star means sufficient care. Means what? B star is equal to X2. X2 is the sufficient care for the victim, right? So B star is equal to X2. Here I am considering that B star is equal to X2. Now we need to find out the best action for player 1. Okay. To calculate the best action, I am drawing a graph here. Okay, on the y-axis we have a payoff, on the x-axis we have a care which is taken by the injurer. Okay, now I am considering that when player T1, that is injurer, is taking sufficient care. Now sufficient care means what? the value of A is equal to what? x1. So here I am calling this point is A star. A star means the care is equal to x1, sufficient care. Okay, now I am considering that this is the payoff. Okay, at this point, now what would happen if I increase the care? If insurer increases his care, what would happen? We know this is the point at which he is taking sufficient care, right? But if I increase beyond this limit, if I increase the care beyond this limit, what would happen? He don't need to pay for any loss, right? But he is investing the money for the care will be considered as negative term in the payoff, right? Because we know what is the payoff for the player 1, the insurer, is minus A minus P of A comma B L A comma B, right? So we know if A star is equal to x1 means what? He is taking sufficient care, and this term will become 0, right? And if I increase A after that, what would happen? We need to consider A only in the payoff, means what? With the increasing the care, the payoff will decrease. Payoff will decrease linearly with A, right? Okay, now what would happen if I decrease the care below the sufficient care? What would happen? Then the player has to pay loss also as per this function, right? I am assuming that as per this function we are getting such kind of graph. Means what? If we decrease the care, the loss is increasing, the fraction amount is increasing, loss will also increase, this term will also increase if I decrease the care, and this fraction is also will increase because he is more responsible for the loss. So both the things will increase, so I will get such kind of graph. So payoff will decrease with the decrease of care. Okay, so what will be the optimal point here? The optimal point is this. This is the optimal point. Which one is the optimal point? A star. So this is the best strategy when we are considering that another player is already taking the sufficient care. Okay, now we calculate the same for the player 2, that is victim. Now this is the axis for the care of victim, and this is the payoff. And here I am considering that while calculating the V2, that the another player, that is injurer, is taking the sufficient care, means A star, and A star is what? Is equal to x1. This is A star is equal to the sufficient care. Now we need to calculate the best action for player 2. So here I am considering that this is the point of B star, the care which is sufficient for the victim. Okay, and here I am considering that this is the payoff at this point. Okay, now what we know the payoff function of victim. What is the payoff function? Minus B minus 1 minus P of A comma B multiply with loss A comma B. This is the payoff function, right? What would happen if I increase the care? If I increase the care, this term will become 0. If I increase the care above the sufficient care, then this term will become 0 because the victim is not responsible for the loss. Okay, because he is taking sufficient care, more than the sufficient care. He is taking more than the sufficient care. So therefore this loss will become 0. He need to pay only this thing. If we increase B, then the payoff will increase with the B linearly, right? But in the negative direction. Okay. Now what would happen if I decrease the care below this point? So the loss, the payoff will decrease again. Why? Because if he is not taking sufficient care, then the loss will increase, because the loss will increase with the decrease of B, because if we decrease the care, then loss will increase. Again this fraction will also increase because he is responsible for the loss. So both the terms will increase and this term will decrease, right? And these two terms are increasing and this term is decreasing. So we will get such kind of graph. Okay, so which one is the optimal point? Optimal point is this. Optimal means the highest payoff we are getting at the point of B star. So again we will get B star. So means what, as per this two conditions, as per these two, we can say that A star and B star is Nash equilibrium of this game. Thank you.